Broadcasting live from the flagship studios in New York's Hudson Valley. This is Revenge of the 80s Radio!
Yesterday I met a guy, kinda dream about the night. He said, "Come on, let's take a ride," and I said, "Okay, yeah." Every move he made was really hip. He's hip, He could be the one to come and steal my heart away. Oh, he could be the one. I like his style. He could be the one whose love won't try. He could be the one to make it all worthwhile. Yeah, he could be the one. He could be the one. He could be the one, he could be the one. Got to say he's super fine, I can't get him off my mind. I know he's not a waste of time, he's got it all, yeah. Every move he made was really hip, he's hip, Got my name and number and I'm waiting on his call. Hey, oh, he could be the one, I like his style. He could be the one whose love won't try. He could be the one to make it all worthwhile. Yeah, he could be the one. 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 In this modern day and age, love's just another passing stage. Everybody's out to score, but love to me is so much more. He could be the one. He could be the one. He could be the one to make it all worthwhile. Yeah, he could be the one. 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 He could be. I like his style. He could be the one. He could be the love try. He could be the one. He could be. I like his style.
He Could Be the One on Revenge of the 80s Radio by the woman who I was hoping would sing at my prom, Josie Cotton. She's my guest here on Revenge of the 80s. Thank you for coming on with us, Josie.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here.
Now, Josie, you're originally from Texas. I'm surprised that you became a new wave queen and didn't wind up being a country girl.
Well, you have to rebel where you can and against your parents, I suppose, and that was my way of branching off. I suppose I could have gone into country music, but and I do love it. But I love it now. I didn't love it back then because it was forced on me so much,
And nobody ever loves their parents' music until maybe later on when you kind of ease back into it a little bit and wonder, hey, it was that good back then. Why didn't I like it back then?
Absolutely. Well, you're trying to separate yourself, and then when I moved out here and someone gave me a Tammy Wynette record and the sun came out behind the clouds, I was just so amazed at that woman's voice.
Well, she'll do that to you.
Absolutely.
What got you into music and performing when you were a younger girl?
Actually, I started off in dance. My father was a ballet instructor, and I grew up in a ballet school, so that was my introduction into performing. And I was a big ham from the get-go. Apparently, was told. So that went on, and then just singing in choirs in school. Actually, it just made me fall in love with the act of singing. I always considered myself, though, more a writer, really, in poetry, and so at one point they just coalesced. I was writing poems and singing, and then I went, well, I'll just put my poems to music, and that's called songwriting, and it kind of evolved like that. When I came out here, I really came out here to be a songwriter, not a singer.
So that was basically your dream, to be a songwriter, rather than when you came to L.A., they thought, hey, you'll be great as a stage singer.
Yeah, I didn't want to be a performer. I didn't want to do that. I wasn't very interested in doing that.
Well, how did you get discovered as a performer?
Well, I was always making demos of my songs, and that's how I met one of the Payne brothers, who actually wrote Johnny Are You Queer, and they, became very good friends of mine. And I heard this song, and they were just doing a publishing demo for Johnny Are You Queer. They just had a Falling Apart with the Go-Go's, who were singing it and performing it in their live shows, and they were looking for just someone to do the demo, and I went, that is the coolest damn song. It just made me laugh so hard, and it was just great on so many levels, and I just pretty much had to convince them that I could do it, and it turned out so well that we just started taking around, and then I guess I got the bug to be a performer at that point, and actually liked it a lot, and everything kind of came together.
Well, you got to do the songwriting thing later on anyway.
Yeah. I did on my first record. I wrote half of that record, so I was able to do that, but I do like singing just other people's music, and just kind of a challenge. That was basically how I came to this town, just trying to, be a writer.
Josie Cotton is my guest on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Josie, in listening to your work from the 80s, in the early 80s I'm talking about, it's very different from what you're doing now. We're going to discuss that later on. You were very reminiscent of the girl groups of the 60s and late 50s, only with more of a modern cutting edge, if you will. Who were some of your earlier influences, and how did they fit into your performing and singing style of the early 80s?
I would say the Shangri-Las were, an amazing one of the amazing girl groups, and I was very, affected by their style and their edge, and also Dusty Springfield wasn't really a girl group, but she was just amazing writer and singer, and just, it's very, the Ronettes were also in that list, and, those would be the major ones, I would say, in the beginning that were, affecting me.
You do have a lot of 60s influences, and I need to say this right now. I saw it on YouTube. You do a very mean secret agent man.
Oh, I don't even have a copy of that. It's the craziest thing. I see stuff on YouTube, and I go, I don't have that, and then it disappears. They take it away, so I don't even know how to get a hold of that. But that was fun. That was the ventures were extremely fun to play with.
Next, we'll talk about the song that made Josie Cotton famous, the real story behind it all, and the controversy one word in the title caused. Josie Cotton is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Johnny, what's the deal, boy? Is your love for real, boy? When the lights are low, you never hold me close. And I saw you today, boy, walking with him, boy. That it hurt me so. Now I gotta know.
Johnny, Are You Queer, sung by my guest on Revenge of the 80s Radio, Josie Cotton. Now, Josie, while this is the song that launched your fame as an artist, and your performance is now considered timeless and a defining moment in new wave history, it caused you a bit of grief from all over. It did cause a lot of whining from extreme parts of both the right and left, didn't it?
Yeah, I did. It was shocking actually to see how people took it completely opposite ways. You know, it was just surreal, really, to see how it was like a Rorschach test of how people could interpret it according to their own, theories of the world.
Well, on one hand, you had that Jan Crouch, that woman evangelist with a pink hair that cries on cue, and she still does. She actually tried to claim that you were, I guess, some sort of demon. Not only that, tried to claim that you weren't even really Josie Cotton, that Josie Cotton didn't exist and you were some sort of a man that sped up your voice.
I didn't know that, that I was actually a man trying to convert people to homosexuality, but she thought so, and they played the song, at half speed, and I did sound like a guy when they played it like that, and I've said it often, I sounded just like Brian Wilson, and it was kind of cool to hear, yourself sound like Brian Wilson, but yeah, they really thought that was something to fear, and they actually used it in some of these religious camps to test people and keep them up and make sure that they weren't homosexual. It was just strange, it was funny at the time. I thought it was funny.
On the other hand, the gay community, especially in New York, the writers for the Village Voice and the Advocate, kind of let you have it as well for the song, right?
That was the hurtful part to me, because them of all people, I thought would get the song and understand the intent and the spirit of it, and it was taken in a way that I really wasn't anticipating, and they thought I was gay bashing, and on the East Coast. On the West Coast, they thought it was an anthem. I was the Queen of the Queens, and it was all good. So it was just absolutely schizophrenic. And then, of course, to be banned in Amsterdam was just too perfect. the moment.
How do you get banned in Amsterdam?
I don't know, but
you and Falco. That's it. I don't know what they had, this huge red light district where anything goes. Most everything is legal over there. Yet they ban some music that they find slightly offensive. I don't quite understand. Now, I'm referring to, of course, Falco's Genie song being banned over there too, along with Johnny Are You Queer.
Oh, no, yeah. I didn't know that.
Do they allow you in now, though?
Well, I mean, they don't know, who I really am or whatnot. But I don't know if I was banned or the song. My manager just told me just to stay away for a while because they were not real happy with me. And that was my old manager, who was actually Michael Jackson's manager, who is, just been in the news like crazy, Randy Phillips.
Chris Cordani here. My guest is Josie Cotton on Revenge of the 80s Radio. There are a ton of rumors surrounding the song. You clarified some of them sort of already, and you clarified a lot of them in a Magnet magazine article, and even more so on your own MySpace page. Let's get into some of them.
Okay.
First, the origins of the song. Now, obviously, the Pain Brothers kind of rewrote it, but supposedly it was from an early punk track.
It was a band called Fear, and they had basically the chorus of the song. There was Johnny, and there was the word queer, and then there was some, other words that definitely will never be allowed on the radio. and I don't know if I can say it right now, but there was no verses and there was no bridge. There was a slight melody similarity, and it would never have been heard because it was just so radical. And the Pain Brothers were working with Fear and the Go-Go's and rewrote it in a pop way so that the Go-Go's could sing it, and they considered it, just an amazing kind of a feminist statement at the time, which is funny because they're not feminists at all by any means, but they consider that to be something like culturally significant, and they wrote it basically, and then there was a coin toss about the publishing when Fear wanted all of it, and so the Pain Brothers won that coin toss and then got the all the publishing on it. But it was passed around like a French hooker, I guess you could say.
The Go-Go's did perform it live several times. It was sort of a staple of their concerts before you recorded it. Since I read about 3 or 4 different accounts as to why the Go-Go's didn't do this song, what actually happened?
Well, the Payne Brothers and the Go-Go's had a production contract, and that the Go-Go's reneged on, and there was a parting of ways, and the Payne Brothers took their song back and forbid them from singing it. And that's basically what happened. And they didn't record it, except they finally did a recording of it on the Beyond the Valley of the Go-Go's. They put it on there. But yeah, it was their big song, live song. It'd be the last song they did at the end of the night, and they became kind of famous for that song. But they obviously made the right decision and went ahead and did what they had to do. You can't argue with their decisions at all. And they, obviously went on to huge success, so they didn't need that song.
Certain things do happen for a reason, and that's the song that launched your career.
You know what? That's a question I ask myself, because I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't done that song, because I had got offered record deals if I would drop that song by IRS at the time, which was D-Label. It was Police and the Go-Go's, and a lot of people were afraid of that song. So, I don't necessarily think it launched my career in, I don't know if that was the ideal thing to have happened to me. Honestly, I'm just speaking honestly right now, which I probably shouldn't do.
I'm with you on honesty. That's what we do here on Revenge of the 80s. Interestingly enough, one could argue that it did launch your career, and one could argue that it didn't, because the song became timeless. The song became a staple of new wave history, and you got to be in the Valley Girl movie, and you performed the song there. On the other hand, there were some record companies who just didn't want to touch it.
That's right, yeah. So, you'll never know. I chose one path down into the forest. That's the reality. So I can speculate till the cows come home, and it is what it is. And I'm glad I did that song. I always knew that I would be the Johnny, Are You Queer Girl forever. And even when I was an old lady, like in a wheelchair, there's the Johnny, Are You Queer Girl, and that's fine. It was a pretty powerful song at the time, and it was hard to deal with the repercussions of it. But now I can look at it, and after it was in Jackass 2 and On a Date with John Waters, I realized that people love that song, and it's fun to have done that.
The shame of it all, Josie, is that it overshadowed a lot of great works that you put together for your first 2 albums. Like, obviously, School Is In, your cover of the Gary U.S. Bonds hit, and of course, He Could Be the One, No Pictures of Dad, which was a gem and a beautiful ballad, actually.
Beautiful. That's what made me sad, is that Johnny, Are You Queer overshadowed so much other music that I thought was of a high quality, and I wanted the world to hear it, and it just didn't get heard, because that one just was louder and crazier. Overall,
though, are you surprised that Johnny, Are You Queer would become so iconic and memorable, even through today?
No, I'm not. I'm not surprised. I knew it was going to rock the nation somewhat, because that word was so powerful, and the word was so taboo. I knew it was cause something. I didn't know it would destroy my career. I didn't know that part. That was a little bit of a surprise. But yeah, I thought it was going to, it was, what's also crazy is in Canada, that song was number 2.
Number 2?
It wasn't allowed on radio in this country.
The radio suits aren't any better than the music industry suits anyway. MTV, of course, also, as always, very fearful. You might remember some of the more shiny moments, like not playing the real Puttin' on the Ritz video because part of it might have been offensive. Obviously, your song fell victim to that, and there wasn't even a video made, was there?
Well, we had a video made, and it was canceled by my record company because they were very afraid of that song. I don't know why Elektra signed the song, because they became very fearful of it and stopped the presses pretty much. They pulled the record from all the stores. It was an international hit and a dance hit all over every country. The people I've talked to, and they didn't have records in the stores. They were terrified of that song.
I guess it goes to show there are small minds from all around.
Yes, yeah, the tyranny of the weak. as they say.
Your album after that, From the Hip, probably deserved better than how it was received. It was seen that the promotion wasn't really all that good, and in many cases it probably goes a bit deeper. What happened?
Well, there's so many stories worse than mine, but it's a political situation. There's new personnel, there's new CEO, new A&R people you don't know, and they don't want to work for something that they didn't sign because they're never going to get the credit. So a lot of times in the old music business, which really hardly exists at all anymore, if you were not signed by the new crowd, they pretty much were going to weed you out and starve you out. You know what I'm saying? They wouldn't get the credit ever because they didn't sign it. So they didn't really care about the acts they didn't sign.
And they deprive us of very good musicians, and they deprive us of creative work sometimes just because of their own egos.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was the most shocking thing to me when I came to Los Angeles was all the great music that will never get heard, was never heard, and just purely from politics. And it's not, the best music isn't always the music that's being sold. And it's different now with the internet. It's amazing how much great music and how if you're a good detective, you can scout out all kinds of things. But it's such a new industry. I don't think anyone really knows where it's going even still.
You seem to have been left, Josie, with a sour taste in your mouth from the problems with Elektra and the industry suits. I'll take a piece from your MySpace blog. It goes, quote, "There are always exceptions, but major record companies are not these magical kingdoms like musicians tend to believe. They're human meat grinders that decimate the most sensitive among us into soylent green patties for consumption by the masses, and that's if you're lucky. If only I was kidding." The very good news is that the internet has literally changed everything for recording artists, even for someone who had her own private Chernobyl in a galaxy far, far away. Those are strong words, Josie.
I'm a dramatic person. Well, you exaggerate to alliterate or something to that effect. I mean, I was exaggerating for an effect. That's how I felt at the time, and I don't think about this. I'm not bitter, or I don't have any kind of anything left of that nature, and I'm just too busy making new records, and it did run me out of the music business for a long time. I was gone. I did not want to be in that world. As you know, I was gone. I didn't, I signed other artists. I had a little record company, and I would still made records, but as soon as, it was a point where you had to go into a press office or into a record company, I was like, no, no, I'm not going to do it. And I just had a fear of it. I felt very misunderstood, and by the press, really, it was a lot of the press that, and then when I went on MySpace and the fans were so great. Then I felt like, God, I let them down. But I have all these records I'm going to be releasing and old records. I have tons of stuff I did that will come out eventually. But I'm writing all the time, and I have this other new record. It's going to be out in a few months, so I'm having fun, and I love what I do.
I see you tried your hand in acting. Have you ever thought about going to the big screen?
Well, no. I like doing that video. I did. Did you see the Man-Eaters video I did?
It was a classic, or should I say it's reminiscent of the classic great low-budget spy movies.
Well, it is, and it's a little kind of an Elvis vibe to it, and a kind of a B-movie thing. That's what I like doing. That's the kind of stage that I want to be on, is just making videos. That's really fun, and I do like that. And yes, I'm a frustrated comedian. I do have, dreams of at some point doing some, ridiculous comedy, and that would be not dramatic acting. I just have no interest in it. But comedy is something. I actually started off in comedy, and I had my own comedy radio show in Dallas, Texas, with a girlfriend of mine. So I have a weakness for that.
We should find some old tapes of that and play that on Revenge of the 80s. Josie Cotton is my guest on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Straight ahead, we'll talk about Josie getting back into the spotlight with a new sound, a new image, and a new outlook on music. Josie Cotton is my guest. I'm Chris Cordani. This is Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Whose dream is this anyway?
Creeps at my door, creeps on my phone. Oh, I wish they'd leave me alone. Creeps at my door, go to your homes. I'm an angry love with torches and stones. Oh, 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 wish they'd fade away. And oh, 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 think they're here to stay. Go away, go away.
That's when I knew she was trying to kill me.
Creeps from the album Movie Disaster Music by Josie Cotton. She's my guest on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Josie, between when you and Elektra parted ways and the early part of this decade, you released an album called Frightened by Nightingales, which was vastly different from what you were known for. It was sort of an introduction for what would be the new Josie Cotton, right?
Well, for me, it was a challenge as a singer to do all these crazy styles of music, and it was more like a Tim Burton soundtrack than anything. And I was just trying to do something that I found challenging and interesting, and it was a funny record, and I just threw it out there, and I didn't think much of anything would happen with that record. It's definitely not a commercial record. I just happened to love this Tim Burton, dark, demented kind of. Someone described it as music you hear at sundown in a trailer park, and someone's just gotten beheaded on the desert. There's something dark and sinister and kooky about it, and I liked that.
That's my kind of music. That probably leads us to the 2002 influence of Fear on Salesmen. What's the deal with the Fear theme?
Well, that was a title I actually ripped off from this book. I never did that record. That was something that I was going to do. So that the title stayed on. But yeah, there's a lot of fear going on. I just thought that was the craziest title from this book, and it was actually a book on how to sell ideas. And it was a primer for salesmen, and it had this picture of this guy, this drawing of this guy just panicked, black. It's a sketch, a pencil drawing, and it just struck me as so bizarre. The influence of fear on salesmen. It was a very David Lynch-ish concept, and to me that's funny. I have a really demented sense of humor. I thought that was hilarious, and it had nothing to do with my connection with fear. I don't think, and that's some subconscious inner workings going on. But that was just something I found funny. And Frightened by Nightingales, that was actually the title given by the man who wrote most of the music on that record, and that was his title for it. And I came into it just believing in him and really wanting to put a face on his music. And I came in pretty much as just as a singer and someone who believed in him. And he had produced the Del Rubio triplets. I mean, this was a true avant-garde producer. And this record would not have gotten heard at all. And I was proud to do it. He was amazing. Is an amazing writer and player and whatnot. So it's just kind of a coincidence. I don't think I'm riddled with fear-obsessed thoughts.
If there was an army of nightingales out to peck me in the head, maybe 10 or 11 of them, I'd fear them.
Well, an army of anything,
Especially those
an
sharp
army of
beaks.
anything is fearsome.
Josie, you and I have another thing in common. Our love and affinity for low-budget movies.
Oh, yes.
Talk about yours.
Well, mine started when I was a little girl, and I just loved all the sci-fi and horror, and later on I got into the really trashy B movies. I say trashy, slightly kidding, but not entirely. And there's just something about them that is so humorous, and the worse the better. And the new ones, you can't really look at newbie movies the same way. It has to be from a certain era, and to me it's the 60s and 70s, and you just see enough really bad go-go dancing and some really messed up psychopaths with brains in jars, and it kind of ruins you for normal movies.
Any movie with Paul Williams, Adrienne Barbeau, Shannon Tweed, all classics for me.
I pretty much eliminated Shannon Tweed from any movie I ever liked. But and Adrienne Barbeau is a little later on. I mean, I'm more of the tourist Satana and pretty much unknown actors who remain so thankfully unknown. I mean, one of the songs from my latest record, the Invasion of the Bee Girls, is Black Klansman. Now, that's my warped sense of humor. It was, it's just wrong. It's politically completely incorrect.
That's never stopped you before.
No, it hasn't. And I relish my bad taste at all moments. But Black Klansman, I really peaked on that one. And the funny thing about it is the worst movie. No one seems to notice in the Klan that this black dude is infiltrated. I mean, he has an afro, and it's just hilarious. But this song from that movie is so beautiful. It is absolutely a classic 60s song. And that's why I call this record a great songs for bad movies. But the main thing that made me sad is the guy, the writer had died, and the songwriter, and his family, like somewhere in the deep South, they knew that a relative had been in Hollywood, and no one would admit to writing Black Klansman, the song. And I thought it was sad because it was great. They were embarrassed. That's what I'm saying. They were embarrassed, and that made me sad because it's such a great song.
It's all that press attention they didn't want to get.
I guess so. They didn't want, no picketing or whatever they thought was going to happen.
There's always somebody. But it was a good song, and I do remember the movie. And yes, a lot of these great songs from these movies sort of, if they didn't transcend them, they were lost in the fact that they were, well, associated with such bad movies.
Well, it's funny, when I got this idea and I was watching this Mothra movie, and these twins, and they're singing to Mothra, and telling her to save the world, and it was the most beautiful song, and it was the most absurd moment, and I just thought, this is the best feeling in the world, for something to be beautiful and ridiculous at the same time. I just loved that feeling, and so I pursued it. I actually did this record 10 years ago, and it got rejected by Rhino Records because they said it was too quirky, and I went, too quirky, Rhino Records, Is the Pope too Catholic? What are we talking? Rhino Records, it's too quirky?
It's like being banned in the Netherlands.
It's something like that. So I pretty much put it on a shelf for 10 years. I just said, if that's the way it is, I'm just, never mind, and I'd done this, there's not a synthesizer on this record. The Tower of Power is on there. It's, Barbra Streisand's violinist, just an insane amount of music, musicality on this record, and so so it was kind of, I was always sad that the world didn't hear it, and I never got it out there. And even though I waited 10 years to put it out, when I was talking to these publishing companies, and they would say, well, this has never been done before. No one's ever done a record of theme songs from B movies. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't. It's so obvious. There's such great songs. How could that not have happened? How come little me, was the one who, it was a huge production to get all the publishing rights, because these people are all dead. This was in the 60s and 70s, and they're, older songwriters. So maybe that was the part of the reason no one did. But and I got into trying to get permission from John Waters. I got into a huge ordeal with him, too, because Female Trouble was originally on this record.
A side note on that, of course, as many of the listeners probably already know, that he included Johnny Are You Queer in a compilation of his.
Yeah, Date with John Waters, Disturbing Love Songs for the Ages.
Chris Cordani here on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Josie Cotton with me. I just want to get into those B movies one more time, because I'm curious to find out some of your favorites.
Oh, okay, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is my absolute zenith of B movies, and I even hesitate to call it a B movie because there was such great,
Sort of an A- movie, right?
Kind of an A- movie. Yeah, I would say that. But I like the really trashy ones too. The way I got the title for this record, Invasion of the B-Girls, was one of the most disturbing movies, and I loved it. But there was no theme song. But it was Invasion of the B-Girls. These were actually these women scientists, really foxy women scientists who were actually bees who killed men for their blood during sex. And I thought that was the perfect plot line, but there was no song, so I just borrowed it for the title, and of course I changed it to B-Girls, as in B-Girl meaning women stars of B movies, and a lot of the women were the powerful. They were the powerful ones in these movies, and that was the interesting thing. When I was watching all these movies, I realized that that's where all the powerful women were in that era. They were in those movies. Even some of the Mexican, Aztec wrestling women versus the Aztec mummy, and these were like, this is in Mexico, and these women were badass, and they were kicking the hell out of the mummy, and you didn't see that in films in Mexico. And I saw that all over the place in that world, all kinds of movies. This is where it was kind of a feminist thing for me. It was being like, my God, this is where they were. This is where they went. They had to go into the B movies.
There was a great line in the movie Reckless Kelly. Now, this might be later than your time, but it was a B movie from Australia, 1991. And Jim DeLance, played by John Panetti, actually said it. He was a director of a movie company. He goes, our movies are so high class that they bypass the theaters entirely and go straight to video.
I mean, one of my favorite B movies it was Basket Case.
Oh, the classic Basket Case.
It's a classic.
I saw Basket Case too, and that was kind of a bad copy or a bad sequel to Basket Case. So you can't even really do sequels of B movies and make them any better. But Basket Case was something, because it was sort of beyond its time. It was a different concept.
It was a different concept, and yet I saw a documentary 2 weeks ago, and I swear this is true. It was a documentary on a parasitic twin, and it looked just like the little creature
Belial.
in Basket Case, and it was actually a head that had eyes that were moving, and its mouth was moving. No body, just a head attached to this little girl's head, and they had to, they showed the surgery and whatnot. But I was going, oh my God, Basket Case was predicting all of this.
It was predicting it, and it was sort of the basis for some sort of genetic engineering, I guess.
Absolutely, yes. It's a prototype for all future science, I think.
But it also reflects some very interesting scientific studies that show a very interesting telekinetic bond between twins.
I've heard that's true. I have actually a fear of twins myself. I've had a couple of friends who were so obsessed with being twins with me. One was a boyfriend, another was a girl, and they would actually show up in the same outfits and repeating the exact things back to me that I had already said to them, and it really scared me, the whole twinism reality. So, fear of twins.
I suppose Basket Case didn't help that much.
No, it didn't. No, it did not. Didn't help.
Let's get into the music, Josie, because listening to it, you realize that there is a lot of Josie Cotton from the early 80s in it, but really the musical quality is something that it seems like you wanted to do over the last many years that you probably couldn't do with the constraints of the industry, and your work is being critically acclaimed more so than ever. As a matter of fact, you've been compared to the likes of Kate Bush. Talk about the differences between Josie Cotton from the 80s and Josie Cotton now as a writer.
I was always a really serious kid, and I wrote really macabre poetry, and I had this whole other side, and I listened to all kinds of different music and international music, and so although I was influenced by the girl groups, I came in with a lot of different musical likes that were not represented in that early music. Although someone really needed to focus me, and that was the thing. You can come to this town, and if you sing too many different styles of music, or you're all over the place, you have to define yourself, and that's what I think the early records I did, they really helped focus me, so that people can look at you without seeing 100 different faces and whatnot. But that was me, and then there was all these other sides of me, and I experimented with the couple of records, the Nightingale record for sure, this other side, and then even movie disaster music was some of the a little more angst-ridden. Not entirely, but it was more self-confessional, let's say. And so now I'm at the point where it's kind of a combination. It's come full circle, and it's a lot of this new record I'm almost finished with, which is called Pussycat Babylon, and that's going to be coming out in November. And that is a lot of the dancey kind of new wave element with some electronica elements and with crazy lyrics. It went way into the lyrics with this. So, I feel like it's a synthesis of everything. It's Tim Burton meets the Shangri-Las, in a electro bar. I don't know. It's a coming together of all these things for me, this record.
You did a lot of that with your last two albums, Invasion of the B-Girls and Movie Disaster Music, where let's put it this way. Maneaters had that psychobilly sound. You go to early jazz, the 40s sound with You're the Boss. You go into early punk. You have a bluegrass feel with Looking for Elvis. Are there any genres you've yet to tackle that we might be hearing in Pussycat Babylon?
Let's see. I don't know. Outside of Slavic ritual, fertility music, I think I pretty much, Well, now that you say that, it makes me really want to throw a polka somewhere on this record, because I don't think I've done a polka yet. Some kind of punk rock polka sounds pretty good to me right about now.
You could do the Johnny Are You Queer polka.
That's right. I'm sure there's some polka company that has done that, because I do see that song in some of these karaoke bars. It's hilarious. These little Korean karaoke bars.
Josie Cotton is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Josie, what do you want people ultimately to remember most about you as a performer?
That I was banned in Amsterdam. That just really strikes me as I might put that on my gravestone. I don't know. As a performer, when you listen to someone's record, you're not really seeing them as a performer. And I haven't toured that much, so I don't know. That's a really rough question. That's such a hard question. I don't know. Other people will have to be the judge. I'm just trying to leave stuff behind, and I thought this Invasion of the B-Girl record, was gonna, do something later on, but it's just so funny now because it's the most requested record on K-Rock right now, and because of Rodney on the Rock discovering it. So that's been a really funny thing to me. As an artist, you're just trying to just leave a body of work, and right now I'm just recording all the time and just trying to do that. And I am going to be doing a country record for my mom. I will end up doing that in this year, at the end of the year. So I promised her I would, and she's 78, so I'm going to do that.
I'm looking forward to hearing that one, too. Are you going to be touring to support the albums?
I am going to be touring. It's still in the planning stages. I'm putting together a trip to Japan to try and get some kind of a situation going over there. I'm obsessed with Japan. I love that culture, and so I'll be doing shows over there, and hopefully trying to get across the country, because people are always asking me, and I want to do it before I'm, just hobbling around on a walker. I'm gonna. This coming year is going to be really busy in that way.
And that's good news for the rest of us. Josie Cotton, thank you for talking with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Thank you so much. This was a really fun conversation.
I really enjoyed it. Now, I would like to play a track from one of your more recent albums. This one is Man Eater from Invasion of the B-Girls by Josie Cotton on Revenge of the 80s Radio.